My name is Tom. I am 42 years old. I own a trucking company. I built this business from scratch. I started as a simple driver, driving an old truck 16 hours a day, sleeping in the cab, eating sandwiches, and dreaming that one day I would be able to run my own company. This path was long. I saw accidents, lost friends who died on the roads, endured humiliation from bosses who paid me pennies while I toiled in all weathers. But I persevered. About 10 years ago, I managed to buy my first truck. I drove it myself, looked for customers myself, repaired the car myself. Then a second car appeared, a third, and now I have a whole fleet of cars, dozens of employees, an office in the city center, and a reputation as a reliable partner. I put everything I had into this business, but I always believed that I was not doing it only for the money. I did it for my family. My wife, Julia, has been by my side all these years. We met when I was a regular truck driver. She worked as a saleswoman in a small store, and I often stopped by her for coffee. We started dating, and then we got married. I loved her, and I sincerely believed that we had gone through all the difficulties together. She supported me when I spent the night in the garage, repairing the engine. She brought me hot tea when I returned from a flight at dawn, exhausted but happy. We built this house together. We have a son, Jason. He is now 13 years old, and I am proud of him. He is a smart boy, passionate about computers, dreams of creating games. I always thought, this is who I work for. This is who I give my strength to. And then there was Mark, my friend. We've known him since college. We played basketball together, went to parties together, received our first penny salaries together. He was there for me during the most difficult periods of my life. When I started my company, I immediately invited Mark to join my team. At first, he helped with paperwork, worked as a logistician. Over time, he became my deputy. I trusted him like a brother. He knew everything about my business, had access to accounts, handled finances when I was on business trips. I trusted him more than I trusted myself. Every evening, returning home after a hard day, I looked at my house and thought, I did everything right. I have a business, a wife, a son, a best friend. We are a team. We are a family. At that time, I did not know that these people to whom I had given my life were already planning how to deprive me of everything. At that time, I was still happy, and I was still naive then. I always believed that a man should be the breadwinner. My father used to say, Tom, a real man is the one who comes home from work tired, but with money in his pocket. I grew up with these words, and I worked my whole life that way. Sometimes it seemed to me that I lived at work more than at home. You wake up, already in the office. In the evening you come back. Your son is already asleep. Julia is already in bed. Her phone on the bedside table is glowing with messages, and I just fall on the couch. I knew that she sometimes resented me for this, that she wanted more attention, but I sincerely believed that I was providing her with the best life. The last 2 years, the business began to grow faster than I could have imagined. New partners, big deals. I bought 5 more trucks, hired drivers, opened a warehouse outside the city. I saw my company grow into a real empire, and I was proud. But at the same time, I spent even less time at home. Working days lasted 14 to 16 hours. Often I even stayed overnight in the office or went on business trips. Julia began to complain. Tom, you don't see me. We live like neighbors. I do it for us, dear, I answered. But I don't just want money. I want a man by my side. I listened to her, nodded, hugged, and the next day I went to the office again. Mark became even more important to me during this period. I handed over the management of finances to him. I no longer checked every deal. I simply signed the documents that he brought. He knew where the keys to the office were. He had access to the accounts. I trusted him with everything. Sometimes I joked, Mark, you know more about my business than I do. He laughed. We're brothers, Tom. This is my brainchild, too. I've never checked on him. Why? That's Mark. Friend, brother, right hand. Julia and Mark began to spend more time together. At first, it was natural. I asked Mark to help me fix the fence. Mark brought in materials to repair the terrace. Mark and I chose furniture online while you were away. I just rejoiced. It's great that they get along. They're like family too. I was so busy, so trusting in them, that I didn't notice the obvious things. And only later, when everything collapsed, did I realize all the signs were right in front of me, but I ignored them. That night, when I stayed in the office until 11 at night, I didn't know yet that my life had already begun to fall apart, that behind my back, those I loved and trusted were building their happiness, that my home was no longer mine. I just sat at my desk, looking at reports, planning to buy 2 more trucks, and I was happy. I was blind. That summer, I worked especially hard. A new contract with a large retail chain opened the door to a completely different level of income for my company. I practically lived in the office, developing logistics routes myself, signing contracts and supervising drivers. I was on a roll. My brainchild, the company I created from scratch, was growing. But as I understand now, it was at this time that I finally lost my family. I increasingly began to notice that Julia was moving away from me. I would come in late, and she would already be asleep or pretend to be asleep. In the morning, I would leave earlier than everyone else. She would just roll over on her other side, muttering something sleepy. I felt a little sorry for myself, but I considered it normal. This is temporary. I'll finalize the deal now, and we'll go and rest. Everything will be fine. I repeated to myself every time. One evening, when I arrived home a little earlier than usual, I found Julia and Mark in the yard. They were standing near the terrace, discussing something. She was laughing, and he was holding a can of beer in his hand and looked as if it was his house, and I was just a guest. "Oh, you're home already?" Julia was surprised. "Yes, I decided to take a few hours off." I tried to joke. "Well, you do." Mark spread his hands. "We're used to you only living on the phone." I laughed. At the time, it was a joke, but now I understand that it was true. I began to notice even more details. When I returned home, Julia always mentioned Mark. Well, Mark advised me to change the curtains. Mark helped fix the faucet. Mark and I chose a design for the new gazebo. I didn't attach any importance to it then. On the contrary, I was grateful to my friend for helping me while I was running my business. I saw him as support, not a threat. But there was one moment that I can't forget. Once my friends and I had a picnic. There were a lot of people, colleagues, neighbors, family friends. I walked around, grilled meat, chatted with the men about business. And then I heard one of my friends joking. "Tom, look, your Mark has already completely taken over your house. Soon he will live here instead of you." Another picked up. "Yes, make sure he doesn't take your wife, ha." Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but something pricked inside. I then brushed it off. They were jokes. People always make up things. I trusted my wife. I trusted my friend. I thought I was a smart, strong man, and I didn't want to seem paranoid. But that was the first time I noticed Julia and Mark exchange glances. Just for a moment, but it was enough to make something click in my heart. I didn't know then that it was the beginning of the end, but the crack had already appeared. One morning, as usual, I arrived at the office earlier than everyone else. While I was drinking coffee, a message from the bank came to my phone. Debit of $48,500. Purpose of payment: transfer to external account. I almost choked. What is this? I did not give orders for such transfers. I immediately dialed Mark. "Listen, almost $50,000 has gone from our account. What is this?" "Oh, yes, Tom. This is a supply. I told you, remember? We urgently closed the deal. The suppliers demanded an advance payment. Everything is fine. I just did not have time to write to you in the morning. Suppliers? Which ones exactly? The ones with whom we agreed on the warehouse. Don't worry, everything is under control. I will show you everything in the evening. His voice was calm. I believed him. It was Mark, but inside me, there was a residue. Something was wrong. I could feel it, but I pushed these thoughts away. Maybe I'm just tired. There's a trick looming everywhere, I told myself. I tried to concentrate on my work, but I couldn't. This amount kept spinning in my head. 50,000. It's no small thing. I couldn't stand until the evening. I went to the accounting department and asked for a statement of accounts for the last month. When I opened the report, I felt as if I had been scalded. Over the past 3 weeks, more than $160,000 had disappeared from the account. Write-offs under various pretexts, prepayment purchases, contractor services. But many of these suppliers were unfamiliar to me, and most of the payments went to the same accounts. I sat looking at these numbers and felt my hands go cold. It was a scam. Someone was siphoning off my money. But the worst part was, I knew who it was. In the evening, I waited for Mark in the office. "Oh, are you still here?" He came in with a smile, as if nothing had happened. "Sit down, let's talk." My voice was cold. Did something happen? I was looking at the statements. What kind of transfers are these? "Tom, what are these? Don't you remember?" We agreed. I could see how nervous he was. He tried to remain calm, but his eyes were darting. I was sure he was lying. I didn't want to make a fuss. Not yet. But I understood I couldn't trust Mark anymore. And for the first time, the thought occurred to me. What if it's not just money? What if it had to do with Julia? I got home late. Julia was already asleep. I sat in the living room, poured myself a whiskey, and looked at our photos together. Happy faces. Family vacations. Me, Julia, Mark. Smiling. And suddenly I realized I'm no longer sure that this was a happy family. I sat in the dark and felt fear rising in me. The fear that comes when you realize your world could collapse at any moment. After that conversation with Mark and reviewing the statements, I could no longer work calmly. I tried to look as if nothing had happened, but something inside me snapped. For the first time, I realized that I could be lied to, and not by some strangers, but by those I considered the most dear. I tried to convince myself that this was a mistake, that I had misunderstood something, that Mark might have done something stupid, but he was not a traitor, that Julia was just tired, and we simply drifted apart because of my work. But the more I convinced myself, the more I felt that I was lying to myself. That evening I returned home earlier than usual. I wanted to surprise him. I wanted to make sure that all my suspicions were just a result of fatigue. I wanted to see my happy wife, hug my son, have a beer with Mark, and realize that I had just fooled myself. I pulled up to the house, turned off the engine, and sat in the car for another minute. My heart was pounding, as if I were going on some kind of test. I went into the yard, and immediately I heard their voices. Julia and Mark were in the yard, near the terrace. They were talking, laughing. I stopped for a moment, remaining around the corner of the house. For the first time in my life, I didn't want them to see me. I stood and listened. "Did you see him running?" Mark laughed. "Yes, he's always in a hurry now," Julia replied. Work. Well, we have more time for real life, don't we?" "Mark, be quiet. What are you talking about?" "Relax. He's at work until night." As usual, I felt my fingers go cold. I didn't know what struck me more, their words or the tone in which they said it. There was such intimacy, such freedom, as if this was their home, as if I no longer existed. I took a deep breath and went out into the yard, trying to smile. "Hi, I'm home early today." They shuddered. For a second I saw fear in their eyes. But then Julia rushed to me. "Oh dear, how nice." Mark quickly pulled himself together too. "Tom, brother, you're scaring us." We're used to you not being here. I laughed with them. I talked about work, joked about the drivers, told them about the new contract. I was the same Tom, but inside, I was no longer him. I couldn't sleep that night. Julia fell asleep quickly, as always. I lay next to her and listened to her breathing. I wanted to believe that I had misunderstood everything, that it was just friendly talk, that I was paranoid, but I already knew it wasn't so. I saw their eyes. I heard their voices when they thought I wouldn't come, and the scariest thing was a feeling that I no longer had control over my life, that everything I had built was slipping away from my hands. I lay in the darkness and for the first time thought, what if I've already lost everything? I just don't know it yet. After that night, I couldn't live my life the way I had before. I woke up and went to sleep with the thought that I was being betrayed by those I had trusted with everything. I looked at Julia at breakfast. She smiled gently, asked about my affairs, talked about Jason, planned my weekend, but every word she said seemed fake to me. I began to suspect her every move. When she lingered in the shower, I thought she was texting Mark. When she went out to the store, I imagined she was meeting him. I was going crazy, but I needed proof. I decided to act quietly. On the way to the office, I stopped at a hardware store and bought several hidden cameras. Modern, small ones, in the form of a charging station, a clock, a desk lamp. No one would suspect that this was surveillance. That same evening, when Julia went to visit her parents with her son, I installed cameras in the house. One in the living room, where they often sat together, the second in the kitchen, the third in our bedroom, in the corner of the closet, the fourth on the terrace, where I found them that time. I did everything quickly and carefully. When they returned, no one noticed anything. But now I saw and heard everything that happened in my house. The next step was the documents. I asked our accounting department to pull up all the contracts and deeds for the past year. I said it was for a pre-audit check, so as not to arouse suspicion. I locked myself in my office and began to study the papers. What I saw made me shudder. Part of the company's assets had been transferred to Julia. This was done as a tax optimization. I signed these papers myself without reading them. Mark explained to me then that it would be more profitable, and I trusted him. But I didn't know what exactly this meant now. In fact, my wife already owned part of my company, and if she filed for divorce, she would officially take half of the business. I would be left with nothing. I also found several strange deals, companies with which I supposedly concluded contracts, but for the first time, I saw their names. Contractors who were transferred large sums of money, but no services were actually provided. When I broke into these companies, I found out that they were either fictitious or belonged to people connected with Mark. It was a scam. They were robbing me, slowly, carefully, and I was sure this was not done without Julia's participation. In the evening, I sat in my office and looked at these papers. It was hard for me to breathe. My life, which I had built for over 10 years, was crumbling right before my eyes. I went out into the living room. Julia was sitting on the couch, watching a movie. I stood in the doorway and just looked at her. "What is it, my love?" she asked. "Nothing. I'm just tired. Come here." She smiled and patted the place next to her. "We'll watch together." I sat down next to her. She put her head on my shoulder, and all I could think about was how she was lying to me every second, and how I would do anything to expose her now. That night I watched the camera footage for the first time. I sat in my office, wearing headphones, and reviewed what had happened in my house during the day while I was away. Julia and Mark were sitting in the living room, drinking coffee, laughing. He was touching her hand. She didn't flinch. On the contrary, she seemed to enjoy it. Then they went out onto the terrace, and I heard her voice. "He doesn't suspect anything. We're almost there. A little more and it'll be ours," Mark said. "All the documents are ready. All that's left is, everything will be fine, Julia. We'll do it." I paused the recording. My hands were shaking. I had no right to doubt anymore. This wasn't just a betrayal. They had already decided to rob me. My home, my business, my life, everything I built. I sat in the dark and understood. Now I had to act, and I wouldn't give them a chance. For the next few days, I lived as if in a strange body. I woke up, had breakfast with my wife, went to work, joked with Mark, and all the while I felt a cold rage growing inside me. I no longer doubted that I was being betrayed and robbed, but I wanted to see it all through. I wanted to catch them red-handed. I continued to watch the camera footage every night. Mostly, it was ordinary conversations. They drank coffee, discussed shopping, sometimes touched on business topics, sometimes laughed, exchanged jokes that only they understood. Sometimes Mark stayed longer than necessary. He sat on the terrace, drank beer. Julia brought him something to eat. Everything seemed like they were just friends, but there was something different in the air. I felt it. On Friday, I said I was going to a business meeting out of town and would be back late that evening. That was a lie. I parked a block away and turned on the live feed on my phone. Half an hour later, Mark was at my house. He walked in like a master without knocking. Julia greeted him in short shorts and a t-shirt, and I knew right away that this time would be different. I clutched my phone, my heart pounding so hard I felt like I was going to vomit. They sat in the living room. They drank wine. They laughed. I saw her put her hand on his knee, how he put his arm around her waist, how she leaned in and kissed him. I stared at that screen and couldn't believe that this was my wife. My Julia, the woman I lived with for 15 years, who swore allegiance to me, who bore me a son. And here she is sitting in our house, kissing my best friend. I thought I was going to smash my phone on the asphalt. I wanted to fly into the house and tear them both apart. But I stopped myself. I remembered the words of the lawyer, whom I had already managed to discreetly consult. Tom, you need ironclad evidence. Don't do anything that could turn against you. But what if I burst in and see them in bed? It would only be an emotional outburst. And remember, your business and home are already partly on her. If you do something stupid, you could lose everything. I forced myself to exhale. I should have been cold. 20 minutes later, they were in the bedroom. I watched them undress, lie down on the bed I had bought for Julia and me. I heard her moan, whisper his name. All of this, right there in my house. I never thought I would feel so much rage and so much pain at the same time. I felt like I was dying, but at the same time, I was more focused than ever. I wrote everything down, everything I needed. I got home at 3 a.m. Julia was already asleep. Mark, I saw, had left around midnight. I lay down next to her. She hadn't even woken up. I looked at the ceiling and listened to her breathing. I knew she wasn't mine anymore, but she didn't know that I already knew that. I lay there thinking only one thing. Did they want to trick me? Did they think I was blind? Did they decide I would just give them everything for nothing? They don't know who they've contacted yet. They'll cry, and I'll make it so they'll remember it for the rest of their lives. I decided I won't get heated. I won't scream. I'll tear their lives apart slowly, and they'll come to me on their knees. I woke up at 6 a.m, although I had hardly slept. I turned my head. Julia was sleeping peacefully next to me. I looked at her and felt only cold. Before, I looked at this woman and saw everything I had worked for. And now, only betrayal, only an enemy. I got up, went to the kitchen, and made myself coffee. I sat down at the table, pulled out my phone, and watched the video from last night again. I was no longer shaking like yesterday. On the contrary, now I was calm, like a surgeon before an operation. Every word they said, every kiss, all this was no longer about love and sex. For me, they were just facts, evidence. I rewound the recording and turned on the moment where they talked after intimacy. I listened carefully, and what I heard was the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. You think he doesn't suspect anything? Mark asked, lying in my bed. Nothing. He's an idiot, Julia laughed. When are you planning to get it done? I've already started. The lawyer said it would be clean. We'll make it look like he agreed to transfer the share to me. And the house? Yes, he did. I've already consulted him. Wow. So he'll be left with nothing at all. It's his own fault. Who made him trust me with everything? I paused. I stared at the screen and couldn't believe what my wife was saying. The woman I protected. The woman I worked for day and night. I was ready to give her everything, and she knew it. But instead, she decided to take it all by deception. And with my best friend, this wasn't just adultery. It was a conspiracy. They wanted to make me nothing, so that I, Tom, the man who built this company, this house, this life, would become nothing. They wanted to throw me away like garbage. I sat there staring at my cup of coffee. Anger was pulsing in my veins, but I wouldn't let it escape. I had already decided that I wasn't going to do anything emotional. I was going to act smart. They thought I was a simpleton working while they built their new happy life. But they didn't know that I already knew everything, and I had already started my plan. I finished my coffee, got up from the table, and went back to the bedroom. Julia had just woken up. "Good morning, my love," she smiled. "Good morning," I replied, trying to look my usual self. "How did you sleep?" "Good. And you?" But I was busy, thinking a lot. "We have a deal next week, a big contract." "You always think about work," she sighed. "But I understand you try for us." I looked at her and realized that this was no longer my wife. This was a woman who planned to steal everything from me. But now she was a toy in my hands. She didn't know yet that from now on, every word she said, every move she made would be part of her own downfall. I went to work and immediately met with the lawyer. I showed him the records, the documents, the transfers. He listened to everything carefully and said, "Tom, this is serious. If you just file for divorce now, you will lose half. She is already formally a co-owner. What should I do? We need a plan. We have to act cunningly. Doesn't she think you know anything?" "Yes, that's what we'll use." We discussed the first steps. I'll transfer part of the business to a trustee to withdraw the assets. I'll prepare a counterclaim so that in the event of a divorce, I can prove her fraud. I'll give the IT guys the task of checking Mark's correspondence on the corporate email. At the same time, we'll establish financial surveillance of them. I left the lawyer's office and felt that for the first time in days, I was in control of the situation. I was no longer a victim. I started my war. Did they want to take everything from me? Now I'll take everything from them. I never thought I would have to fight against my own wife and best friend. These people were a part of my life. I trusted them with everything, my business, my home, my future. And now I was sitting in my lawyer's office, plotting how to destroy them. I didn't care about their feelings anymore. I no longer saw Julia as the woman I loved. And Mark was no longer my friend. These were thieves who had come to take away what I had spent decades building. My lawyer, Robert, was a man in his 50s, gray-haired, calm, with a cold gaze. I had known him for a long time. He had helped me buy a house and start a company. But back then, these were simple deals. Now, this was war. I told him everything. I have a video of them discussing the plan. There are statements about suspicious transfers. There are documents where my share of the business is already registered in Julia's name. I know they want to file for divorce when everything is ready and take half. They think I don't know anything. Robert listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, he looked up. "Tom, they prepared well, but they made one mistake. They underestimated you. What should I do? We will use their self-confidence. They think they have already won. We will make them think so, before it is too late." Robert proposed a plan. Don't show that you know anything. Continue to play the role of a loving husband and a trusting friend. Smile. Ask for advice. Pretend that you are the same simple Tom who always trusts people. Transferring assets. We will gradually begin to withdraw money and valuable assets to another legal entity. We will register a new company in the name of your trusted person, Robert's nephew. All real profits will go there. Only debts will remain from the company where Julia is the co-owner. Collection of evidence. In addition to the video, it will be necessary to document their conspiracy. Robert advised hiring a private detective for external surveillance. He will also connect an IT specialist to obtain Mark's correspondence via corporate email. House monitoring. Strengthen the cameras. Wiretapping in the bedroom and kitchen. All their steps must be recorded. The final blow. When we collect all the evidence, you will file a fraud lawsuit. We will initiate the seizure of accounts. In parallel, a lawsuit for divorce, but with accusations of abuse and deception. We will make sure that she leaves with nothing. And most importantly, Tom, said Robert, don't get excited. I will endure it, I answered. If you break down and make a scandal, they will run away, and we will lose our chance. I understand. I left the lawyer's office calm. I was no longer a driven man, afraid of losing everything. I became a predator. I was waiting for the moment to strike. In the evening, I returned home. Julia had already served dinner. My son was telling me how he got an A at school. I looked at him and felt pain. Because of her, I could lose my family. Because of her, I could lose the opportunity to raise my son. But I won't let that happen. How's work going, honey? Julia asked. I'm fine, I smiled. I think we'll make a big deal soon. Oh, that's great, she perked up. Maybe we'll go somewhere. Relax then. Absolutely, I said, looking her in the eye. I could see her playing the part. I could see her thinking she already had me in her pocket. And all I could think was, soon you'll be asking me to leave you something. But I won't leave you anything. Those days were a real test for me. I would come home, sit down to dinner with my wife, listen to her, smile, kiss her, lie down next to her in bed. At the same time, I knew that this woman had already dug a hole for me. I saw her texting someone on her phone every night. Sometimes she would go to the bathroom and sit there for a long time. I knew who she was texting. And every time she would go back to bed, she would hug me and whisper, "Sleep, my love." I would hear completely different words in my head. A little more, and he would be left with nothing. I understood that now everything depended on my patience. Any of my emotions could ruin the plan. I had to be quiet, cold, iron. I learned to hide hatred under the mask of a caring man. I even started spending more time at home, telling her how tired I was at work, how I wanted peace, how I dreamed of our whole family going to the seaside. Julia listened, nodded, smiled. But I could see that she didn't care. She already had another plan in mind. I met with a private detective. His name was Jack. He was in his early 40s, a dry, stern man who had seen many family tragedies. I gave him their photos and said, I need to know where they meet, how often, where they go. We'll work quietly, Jack answered shortly. And I need photos. Anything you can get. We'll do it. A few days later, I received the first reports. Every detail was like a stab in the back. Monday, 2:30 p.m., Mark drove up to your house. Spent 3 hours there. Wednesday, 11 o'clock, meeting at a cafe. Hugs, kisses. Friday, 1,600 hours, rented apartment. Spent 2 hours there. I was looking through these photos. Julia with my best friend, her hands on his chest, their lips merged in a kiss. And I felt that burning hatred again. But I held myself together. I knew that this was just the beginning. One day I caught myself thinking, what if I hadn't noticed anything then? What if I had continued to believe her? What if I had signed all the papers she wanted? A cold sweat broke out in me. I would be left with nothing. I would have lost my house, my company, my son. I would have become just a pauper who could not prove anything. And the worst part was, I would watch them live together in my house. How Mark raised my son. How they spent my money. how I had become nothing to them. This thought gave me strength. I realized I'm not just getting revenge. I'm saving my life. I continued to watch them. Every day of their lives was on my screen. I listened to them make plans. As Julia said, in another month, everything will be ours. He doesn't even know, laughed Mark. We got him. And I sat in my chair and smiled softly. They thought they had outsmarted me, but this was only the beginning of their end. That evening, when we were having dinner, Julia said, "Honey, I think we should get a new contract with a lawyer about the house. It's just to be safe." "Yes, of course, my dear. I trust you completely," I answered. "I knew you were the best for me," she smiled. I looked at that fake smile and thought only of one thing. Soon this smile will disappear, and you yourself will ask me to leave you at least something. But I will not leave. I will erase you from my life like a stain. I endured. I waited, and I knew this day would come very soon. I have always believed that the main strength of a man is endurance. When you strike back immediately, this is emotion. And when you endure, remain silent and wait for the right moment, this is strength. That morning, when I was sitting in Robert's office, I felt that the strength was now in me. I no longer hesitated. I knew what I had to do. "Tom, we are starting," the lawyer said, looking me in the eye. "Now your every action must be clear. No spontaneity. And most importantly, be calm." "I understand," I replied. Robert unfolded a plan before me. 1. Creation of a new company. We are registering a new company. Formally, it will be a different type of activity, warehousing services, but in reality, all your main contracts and profitable clients will go there. My nephew Brian will be the manager. He is reliable. Legally, your name will not be there, but in fact, it is your company. 2. Asset transfer. We will gradually transfer the machinery, equipment, and best employees to the new company. The money that clients are currently paying to the old company will go as advances, but from the new company. In fact, your old company will become an empty shell with debts. If Julia wants to take half, she will only get a debt hole. 3. Real estate control. In parallel, I will begin the process of removing the house from risks. We will check if there is a loophole to declare the previous contract invalid. If not, we will create a lien on the house so that she cannot dispose of it. 4. Accelerate the divorce. We will push them to think that they have already won. We'll pretend you're tired, ready to take responsibility. They'll ask you to sign the final papers themselves. 5. Strike. After signing, we'll show them that the company no longer exists. We'll uncover the fraudulent schemes. We'll go to court with evidence of adultery and financial fraud. Julia and Mark will be left with nothing. I listened to Robert and understood this was the perfect trap. They'll sign their own sentences, thinking that they're signing documents for their happy future. "Shall we start?" the lawyer asked. "Shall we start?" I replied. That day I came home in a good mood. I brought flowers for Julia. My son, Jason, was surprised. "Dad, you haven't done this in a long time. Sometimes you have to surprise a woman." I smiled. I could see the disbelief in her eyes, even the fear, but she quickly hid it behind her usual smile. "Oh, thank you, honey. You're so romantic." I knew she would call Mark and tell him I was acting strange, and I wanted that. I wanted them to think I didn't suspect anything, that I was just a fool feeling guilty and trying to save my marriage. In fact, I was already tightening the noose around their necks. The next day I came to Mark's office. "Look, brother, I'm tired. I want to rest a little." "What's wrong?" He tensed. "It's okay. I just want you to manage the finances better. I'm already fed up with these papers." "No problem. You know I'll always cover it up. That's why I trust you." I shook his hand. I saw him believe it. He thought I had finally given up. He didn't know yet that I had been waiting for this moment. I did everything as usual for the next few days. But in the shadows, The operation was going on. The documents for the new company were drawn up. The accounts were opened. Key clients were already receiving calls from the new firm. My business was no longer their prey. It belonged only to me, and they didn't know it yet. That evening, I lay down in bed next to Julia. She fell asleep quickly, and I looked at the ceiling and thought, soon, just a little longer, and you two will fall like I've never fallen before, and I'll stand and watch your new life crumble. I waited, and now this waiting brought me pleasure. Another week passed. I continued to play the role of a tired man who had finally decided to give up. I pretended that I was no longer interested in business, spending more time at home. I cooked breakfast for Julia, took an interest in her affairs. Several times, I even offered to take my son to school myself, to show her that I didn't worry about anything, that I just wanted to be a family man. I was an actor, and she believed me. I saw it in her eyes. She no longer worried. She already imagined herself the mistress of this house. One evening, when I was washing the dishes after dinner, she came up to me and said quietly, "Darling, we have such a good time together. I was thinking, maybe you'll sign the documents we discussed, to keep everything calm." I took a breath, dried my hands on the towel, and turned around. I was thinking about that too. You're right. I want you to feel protected. Are you serious? Yes. Bring the papers. I'll sign everything you need. I saw her eyes light up. She tried to hide it, but I saw it. It was the look of a winner. She thought she had it all. The next morning, I went into Mark's office. "Bro, I have some great news," I began. "What is it?" "I've made up my mind. I'm signing the papers, giving Julia my share and letting her handle the paperwork. I want to get away from it for a while." "You've made up your mind?" "Yes." I saw him look at me, not believing his ears. He thought I had given up too, and he was glad. "This is the right decision, Tom. We are always there." "I know." I shook his hand, and at that moment I wanted so much to press his fingers until they bled. But I smiled, and I played on. The next few days, everything went even faster. The lawyer, whom Julia had recommended to me, brought a package of documents. There were re-registration of the house, confirmation of partial ownership of the business, some additional agreements. They were sure that I would sign, and that would be enough to make me a nobody. I signed every piece of paper, smiling, joking. I even hugged Julia afterwards. I saw her shake the lawyer's hand, thinking that I hadn't noticed. I saw everything, but they didn't know the main thing. These documents no longer had value. The company they wanted to take over no longer existed. The house they wanted to take away was in the process of being encumbered. The money they thought was theirs was no longer in the accounts. I had officially agreed to give them the empty lot, and now all I had to do was press the button and launch the final blow. That evening we had dinner, the three of us, me, Julia, and my son. "I'm so happy that everything is getting better for us," she said, touching my hand gently. "Me too, honey," I replied. "Only the best is ahead." I looked into her eyes, and I thought, you have no idea how much best is ahead. But for me, for you, hell begins. I waited for morning. This was the day their world was going to collapse. The next morning I woke up with a strange feeling. It was the day I had been waiting for weeks. The day my game was over. I got up earlier than usual. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and just stared out the window. I could see the city waking up, people hurrying to work, and my house was still quiet, the calm before the storm. Julia came downstairs in her bathrobe, yawning. "Oh, you're up already?" she asked, surprised. "Yes, I decided to start the day calmly. How are you feeling?" "Great," I smiled. "I'm calmer than ever." And it was true. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't in pain anymore. I was cold as ice. I looked at her, and I wondered, does she even realize that today is her day of ruin? Does she really think she's won? I knew she'd already told Mark that everything was ready, that the papers were signed, and now they could move on to the final stages of their plan. I imagined them probably drinking coffee or texting, imagining their future in my house, with my money. They already saw themselves as winners, and I saw them in the mud. I got to the office. Mark was already there. He looked like a man who had just won the jackpot. "Tom, how are you?" "Great. I think I can relax a little now." "Sure. I always said you worked too hard." I could see how happy he was. His smile was wider than usual. He didn't even try to hide his pleasure. To him, I was nothing, just a cog that wasn't needed anymore. "I'll go to the bank later," Mark said. "Anything important?" "No, just a formality. You know, we need to adjust some things a little now." You handed over the reins to Julia. I nodded. He really thought I had given everything. After lunch, Julia texted me, "Honey, thank you for being so smart. You did the right thing. We'll all be happy together now. I love you." I looked at the screen and almost laughed. I love you. She's playing the part even now. Even now, she's lying. But it's too late. She just doesn't know yet that today she's going to lose everything. After work, I drove to Roberts. He was already waiting. All the papers were ready. All the assets were transferred. The fraud lawsuit was filed. All that was left was to press a button. "Are you ready?" Robert asked. "More than ever. We filed the paperwork. Now it's official. All of Julia's accounts are frozen. Her share in the company is worthless. The house is under arrest. She can't sell or transfer anything. And most importantly, a case of financial fraud has been opened." I would come home and feel everything calm down inside me. It wasn't just pleasure. It was liberation. I was no longer a victim. I had become the one dictating the terms. I imagined Mark coming to the bank tomorrow and finding out that the accounts were empty. How Julia would try to contact a lawyer and be told that a case had been opened against her. How they would realize that their plan had failed. And how they would see that I had known all along. I arrived home. Julia was making dinner. "How was your day, honey?" "Great. I feel like I have everything under control." I looked at her and thought, "Today is your last peaceful evening. Tomorrow you will wake up in hell." I sat down at the table, picked up a glass of wine, and raised it. "To the family," I said. "To the family," she smiled. She didn't yet know that this family no longer existed. The next morning I got up, as usual, at 7. Julia was still asleep. I quietly gathered myself, drank some coffee, kissed her on the cheek, and drove to the office. I knew this day would be different. It was the very day I had been waiting for. The day their world would start to fall apart. At 9:15 the phone rang. I already knew who it was. Mark's number flashed on the screen. "Tom, hi, listen, there's a problem." His voice sounded tense, although he was trying to keep himself in check. "What happened?" "At the bank, the accounts are blocked. Everyone. I can't withdraw money. They say there's some kind of arrest." "Really? I've never heard of that." I feigned surprise. "Can you come over? We need to figure it out." "Sure, bro. I'm on my way." I hung up the phone and smiled. Everything was going according to plan. When I entered the bank, Mark was already pacing back and forth like a caged animal. His face was red, sweat dripping from his forehead. "Tom, this is some kind of mistake. We have an arrest. This is impossible. Calm down. Let's talk to the manager." A representative of the bank came out to us, a reserved woman with glasses. "Gentlemen, your accounts have been frozen based on a court order. A lawsuit has been filed for fraud and falsification of financial statements." "What? What fraud? Is this some kind of joke?" Mark raised his voice. "Excuse me, I'm just passing on information. The accounts are under arrest until the circumstances are clarified." I watched as Mark's face turned pale. He started muttering something, took out his phone, called someone, but no one answered. I stood nearby, pretending to be confused, although inside I was filled with pleasure. While Mark was fussing, I quietly went out into the hallway and dialed Robert. It worked. They're already panicking. Okay, the next step is a house. We're getting a restraining order. We'll have a decision by lunchtime today. Thanks, Robert. We're finishing them off. When I returned to the bank, I found Mark sitting on the couch with a blank look in his eyes. What did they say? I asked. I don't know. Is this some kind of excuse? Maybe they're your competitors. Maybe. I'll figure it out. I put my hand on his shoulder. I saw fear in his eyes. He was used to being confident, always knowing that he was in control. And now the ground was slipping from under his feet. And that was just the beginning. When I got back to the office, the phone rang again. This time it was Julia. Tom, what happened? I just went to the bank, and they told me our accounts were frozen. Don't worry, honey. We'll figure it out. But how could this happen? I've already called my lawyer, and he says he doesn't know anything about it. I'll figure it out myself. Don't worry. I could hear the panic in her voice. She could already feel that something was wrong. Her perfect plan was starting to fall apart, but she didn't yet understand that this was just the beginning. She came to my office that afternoon. I pretended to be very busy, but in reality, I was expecting it. Tom, we need to do something. Maybe we got some other paperwork wrong. I'm already working on it. I answered calmly, but it's our money. Yes, ours. I looked her in the eye, and for the first time in all this time, I allowed myself a slight cold smile. She shuddered. For a moment, I saw horror in her eyes. Perhaps it was at that moment that it dawned on her that I knew, that she had lost. But she still hoped that it was a coincidence. That evening, when I got home, Julia was already nervous. Tom, I don't understand. What's happening to us? Don't worry. I'll figure everything out tomorrow. I sat down in the chair and turned on the TV as if nothing had happened. But I could see her pacing the room, as if she couldn't find a place for herself. I knew that she had already called Mark 5 times. I knew that they had already understood. Someone had bypassed them. And this time it was me. I looked at her and thought, this is just the first blow. Tomorrow will be the next one, and then another, until you both fall to your knees. I lay down in bed, and she couldn't fall asleep for a long time. I could hear her getting up, going out into the hallway, texting someone. I knew she was begging Mark to find a solution, but there were no more solutions. All they had left was fear. The next morning I woke up to Julia already scurrying around the house. I heard her talking nervously on the phone. I don't understand how this could have happened. What do you mean the accounts are frozen? What about the business? Mark, say something. I stood up, stretched, and pretended not to hear anything. What happened, honey? I asked, as if I were hearing it for the first time. Tom, things are bad, very bad. Her voice trembled. What is it? The company could be closed. The accounts are frozen. Our house is under arrest. What are you saying? I sat up, pretending to be shocked. I knew I would never forget this moment. It was my victory. An hour later, she was sitting in the kitchen, crying. Her eyes were red. Her hands were shaking. Mark didn't answer. She called him again and again, but I knew he had escaped. The first rat to leave the ship. At lunch, she tried to be strong. We'll figure it out, Tom. Right? I put down my coffee cup, looked at her, and said, We'll figure it out, Julia. What? I know about everything. About you. About Mark. About your plan. I said it calmly, without shouting, and that killed her more than any scandal could. Her face twisted in panic. Tom, It's not true. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me anymore. I've seen everything. I have the videos, the correspondence, the documents. It was a mistake. I love you. You love my money. And you thought you'd take it with Mark. But you miscalculated. She covered her mouth with her hands and burst into tears. And I looked at her, and I didn't care. I went to the office, brought the divorce papers. You can sign it now. But, Tom, he's your son. We're family. I made sure that my son stayed with me. I have evidence of your betrayal and financial fraud. You can't do that. I can, and I will. I threw the pen on the table. Sign it, and get out of my house. She signed. Her hands were shaking. Tears were dripping onto the papers. I took the documents, checked them, and put them in a folder. You have an hour to pack your things. She was still trying to say something, begging me to leave her at least a house, at least some money. But I kept repeating one thing. Get out. I watched her pack her suitcase. Once this woman had been my life. Now she was nothing. She stopped in the doorway. Tom, I'm sorry. I was silent. She went out. I closed the door. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. That evening, I found out that Mark had been fired. His accounts were frozen. He was being sued for financial fraud. His wife found out about the infidelity and filed for divorce. His life was also going downhill. He called me that day. I picked up the phone. Tom, I didn't want to. It's Julia. I don't want to hear. I'm sorry, please. You don't exist to me anymore. I hung up, and I never mentioned him again. That night I sat in my house, in the house they wanted to take away. I drank whiskey and looked at a picture of my son. I won. I saved my life. And I got rid of the traitors. I felt no regret. I felt only one thing, freedom. It had been 3 months since Julia had left this house. 3 months since Mark had ceased to exist for me. During that time, I had been through everything: anger, emptiness, pain, fatigue. But now I was different. I no longer lay awake at night, listening to my wife whispering on the phone. I no longer sat in the car with trembling hands, staring at the phone screen where she was kissing my friend. I was no longer the man they wanted to break. I got up, and I survived. My son stayed with me. The court was on my side. Lawyer Robert had done everything he had promised. The evidence of her betrayal and fraud was undeniable. Julia came to her son once a week. She looked haggard, thin, old. She lived in a rented apartment. I heard she worked at a clothing store, and every time she stood in the doorway, I saw shame in her eyes. She didn't play a role anymore. She knew she had lost, and I knew she would never forget it. Mark, I had heard about him from acquaintances. He had moved to another city. The divorce had taken its toll on him. His reputation in business was ruined. He had tried to start his own business, but it didn't work out. People don't want to work with people who betray their friends. I didn't seek out him. For me, he was a thing of the past, like a dirty trail that I had erased. I got to work. After everything that had happened, my company became even stronger. I hired new people, changed my approach. I no longer trusted anyone blindly. But most importantly, I began to look at life differently. I realized that the true strength of a man is the ability to survive betrayal, loss, pain, and come out of it stronger. One day, when I was sitting in a cafe, a young woman approached me. She smiled. Tom, is that you? Yes. Excuse me. Do we know each other? I'm Amanda. We went to school together. Remember? I looked closely. Yes, it was her. Once she was a girl I liked, and now she is a beautiful, self-confident woman. We sat down and talked. It turned out that she works in a law firm, divorced. She is raising a daughter alone. I looked at her and caught myself thinking, life does not end. Everything is just beginning. That evening, returning home, I felt that I no longer looked back. I no longer look for lies in every woman. I no longer live in hatred. I became stronger, and now I know that no one will ever do to me what they did. I sat down in a chair, took a glass of whiskey, looked at a photo of my son, and I thought, I persevered. I survived, and now I know the true price of life. My name is Tom, and now I am stronger than ever. End of chapter 16. This is the end of the story. How do you like it? If everything is fine, I can do a translation into English and Spanish, or prepare the text for the cover and the title. Write what you need. You said, given. ChatGPT said, Chapter 17, Return to Life. A year has passed. Life gradually became different. I no longer woke up with a heavy heart. I no longer felt that burning hatred that had consumed me when I first learned about their betrayal. Time did not heal everything, as they say in books. No, time only helped me accept reality and draw conclusions. Now I was no longer the naive man who thought that love was once and for all. I no longer lived with illusions. I accepted the truth of life. The real support of a man is himself. Not a wife, not a friend, only yourself. I focused on work. The company was working stably. I hired a new CFO, completely changed the management team. I no longer trusted everything to one person. Now I had 3 people who controlled different directions, and each was responsible for his own area. I became stricter, but at the same time more fair. My employees knew, if you are honest, I will do anything for you, and if you betray me, you will burn out. My relationship with my son became even stronger. I began to spend more time with him. Weekends belonged only to him. Fishing, bowling, football. I saw how happy he was when I was around. I knew that he had survived the blow. Children feel everything, but I did everything so that he saw strength in me, not weakness. And I saw how proud he was of me. For me, that was the most important thing. Julia, she no longer tried to come back. We only saw each other when she came to pick up her son. They were short meetings. She no longer looked me in the eye. Her pride was broken. I didn't hate her. I just didn't feel anything for her anymore. She was an empty place for me. I had only heard about Mark from acquaintances. He had moved cities several times, tried to find work, but never stuck anywhere. People remembered his reputation. No one trusted him. He had become what he had always feared he would become, a nobody. One evening I was sitting on the terrace of my house, the very house they wanted to take from me. I was watching the sunset. I was drinking whiskey, and I felt silence. It was the silence of victory. I hadn't just survived. I had persevered. I had become stronger. And I knew that now I would never let anyone do that to me again. I was no longer the trusting person who had taken Julia by the hand and led her to the wedding 15 years ago. I was no longer the one who called Mark, but a brother. I became different. And this was not the end of my life. It was a new beginning. I looked at the horizon and thought, I will never let anyone control me again. I am now in control of my life, and it will always be that way. My name is Tom. I am 43 years old. A year ago, I lost everything I held most dear. My family, my friends, my faith in people. I thought I would never get through this. I thought it was the end, but I was wrong. This was the beginning of my new life. I learned the most important thing. People can betray you. The ones you trust the most can be the ones who stab you in the back. But you always have a choice. Stay in the mud or get up and become stronger than ever. I chose the latter. I no longer trust blindly. I no longer expect someone to take care of me. I am responsible for my own life. I have grown a company that is now running smoothly. I am raising a son, and he sees me as a man who never gives up. I have regained my respect. First of all, my respect for myself. Julia, she is no longer a part of my life. Mark no longer exists for me. I have let go of this hatred, because a strong man does not hold on to the past. A strong man looks forward. Now I can say this with confidence. I am no longer afraid of betrayal. I am no longer afraid of loss. I am no longer afraid of being alone, because I know I stood up once. I will stand up always. I sit in my house, drink coffee, and watch my son play in the yard. This is my home. my land, my life. And now I know no one will ever be able to come and take this away from me, because I am different now. I am stronger, and I will never be the same again. My name is Tom, and this is my story. The story of how I survived betrayal. The story of how I won. End of story. Please subscribe to our channel Stellar Stories. We have new amazing stories coming out every day. Thank you.